Established in 1959, the Kenyan section of the International Commission of Jurists, ICJ Kenya, is a non-partisan, non-governmental organization with membership drawn from legal students, the private legal profession and the judiciary. The organization works to promote and protect human rights, democracy and the rule of law nationally and regionally. It has established a consistent track record in this regard and is today widely acknowledged as a premier human rights organization in Kenya and around Africa.
ICJ's strategy has been around increasing public information about rights, increasing public awareness about rights, and ensuring that the public understands that rights are entitlements, they are not favors.
ICJ Kenya aims to serve its beneficiaries by improving the protection of their human rights, access to justice, citizen empowerment, and the justice systems and institutions in Africa. This is achieved through advocacy, legal research and analysis, capacity building, and impact litigation.
ICJ Kenya is a learning institution and an educating institution, which makes research a very important component of our work.
The organization also invests in its network with key stakeholders and maintains a solid system of monitoring, evaluating and reporting the activities carried out by its secretariat to establish best practices in international human rights in Africa.
M&D is a critical part in project delivery, and it helps the programs ensure that they achieve what they set out to do. And it calls for a very open organization to put in M&D in place.
A couple of years ago, CISOYA awarded ICJ the overall winner under financial management in the civil society. That was very good for us because we're amongst the best in the sector.
Under its democratization program, ICJ Kenya works towards the observance of democratic processes in Kenya.
And on access to information, constitutional recognition of the right in the Constitution, we, together with other civil society actors in Kenya, engaged with government, and it led to the development of an access to information bill in Kenya, which I think is now at the stages of being presented to Parliament.
The program supports the work of the National Assembly, county government and the Independent Electoral Boundaries Commission to undertake and consolidate reforms that are necessary for democracy in Kenya.
We at ICJ provided background research on the many components that we now see in the Constitution. And after its promulgation in 2010, we have been at the forefront of implementation. We still continue with background research for many counties, but we have been heavy on training for the county governments, both the executive and the assemblies.
ICJ is a robust civil society in this country. ICJ has been a critical body, and one of the distinguishing factor or character of ICJ is that it gives critical, progressive criticism where there's need for the civil society to really speak and point out where improvement can be made in terms of governance.
The process of elections is not complete unless it is able to deliver justice for those with complaints about how elections had been conducted. So our support was for and in relation to electoral justice, and we worked with the judiciary a lot. So I supported the Judicial Committee on Elections Preparedness that had been established by the Chief Justice to ensure that they are prepared and able to deal with the end of elections that deals with electoral justice.
The program also seeks to empower citizens to participate in the democratic process through improved access to publicly held information.
We have a Freedom of Information network in Kenya that is represented in the former regions of the Rift Valley province. And some of the issues that we've empowered them to do is to demand and engage with government, and we've seen them do a lot of initiatives towards that.
Under its Human Rights Protection Program, ICJ Kenya continues to advocate for improved remedies and their enforcement and equips the public with knowledge that will assist in identifying transgressions and available remedies.
And we do this in partnership with other civil society organizations, government, and at the same time we have a network of around 300 paralegals in 6 areas in Kenya, that is Kitui, Taita Taveta, Kwale, Meru, Transmara and Laikipia.
Prior to the enactment or the promulgation of the Constitution in 2010, really the country didn't have a framework for public participation. But when that came into place, then it required that any piece of legislation, before it can be sent to cabinet, has to go through public participation. And ICJ was very crucial in collaboration with OSIA to ensure that this bill is taken around the country, to ensure that there was public participation. Yes, so that we got input from members of the public and the stakeholders.
The Access to Justice program supports reforms that have led to timely and cost-effective access to courts, other organs of the state and alternative private arrangements concerned with the delivery of justice and the enforcement of the law.
We do publications on the areas that we think will benefit our users, the public, the lawyers, the judges, policymakers in the National Assembly. For example, on the social economic rights that we just did the other day is a case digest that captures all those rights under the Constitution that are of social and economic by nature.
The program supports key judicial reform process and the development of alternative justice mechanism and the local application of international standards.
We have what we call the court users committees. Its membership draws around from the people who use the court. For example, Eldoret Court, you find people who are users or consumers of justice within those courts. They're able to come and sit down and discuss what are the issues that they are facing that are making them not access justice through the courts.
ICJ Kenya undertook litigation before the East African Court of Justice and the African Commission on Human and People's Rights as part of its objective of increasing access to justice for human rights abuses. The case before the East African Court of Justice related to serious human rights abuses in the Mount Elgon region, which fell under the control of a violent militia group, the Sabaot Land Defense Force. ICJ Kenya also established a working relationship with the Judicial Working Committee on Election Petitions at its inception. It is through this intervention that the committee developed its work plan, trained all judicial officers on electoral disputes, facilitated a peer learning exchange between itself and the Ugandan judicial officers. It also made legislative amendment proposals on the Elections Act and drafted the election petition rules.
Capacity building of the judicial officers to deal with the election petitions was critical. Some of the magistrates, some of the judges, quite a number of them had been engaged. They had not been in the judiciary before. They had just been employed. They had not handled any election petitions. So training was a crucial aspect of our work as a committee. And by ICJ sourcing for us, getting for us the resource persons, that was quite crucial.
The implementation of program is coordinated by a secretariat run by the executive director, who is assisted by experienced administrative personnel.
We have 16 members of staff who are permanent and 3 volunteers and 3 legal researchers. With time, ICJ has partnered with some institutions abroad, and they provide us with lawyers who come to work with us on volunteer basis. And some of these institutions include Seattle University, Canadian Bar Association, and Canadian Lawyers Abroad.
ICJ Kenya is currently in the process of implementing its strategic plan, which has set out its aspirations for the year 2011 to 2015.
By the end of the plan and even beyond, that will continue to see greater democratization, that human rights will be protected, and that the rule of law will be respected by everyone, irrespective of their position.
ICJ Kenya has established a number of network relationships through which it seeks to carry out its mandate. The categories of ICJ Kenya's partners include donors, government departments, and individual civil society partners, both local and international, as well as grassroots organizations across Kenya.
Any process of legislation development, you need partners who can lobby, and ICJ has been that to us.
Through its international cooperation program, the organization supports the development of effective institutions of governance and accountability in the continent. ICJ Kenya supports the strengthening of accountability for international crimes in Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Sudan, Rwanda, and Burundi.
We have been able to work with journalists. We have trained journalists on how to report on ICC cases. And one of the key impacts is that now journalists look at ICJ as a credible source of information pertaining the cases and also just international criminal law. And then the second is that you have been able to file these two cases. At least victims of atrocity crimes can be able to tell their story in court.
ICJ Kenya has done a lot of work in the ICC process, or generally speaking in the international criminal justice process. And right from before the post-election violence, ICJ was heavily involved in ensuring that the political and legal environment enabled the punishment of international crimes. And then in the wake of the post-election violence, ICJ was again pivotal in trying to call for sanity after the violence broke out, and trying to see if it was possible to come up with a transitional government.
And one of the major milestones and achievements that we've had is when Bosco Ntaganda escaped to Rwanda and requested to be surrendered to the ICC, and there was this moment of uncertainty as to whether Rwanda would surrender him, because you see they don't have the law that enables them to surrender Ntaganda, yet he has subjected himself to a process that he says he wants to be surrendered to the ICC when he came out of the bush. And we had civil society and even the media highlighting this issue and saying that Rwanda would then be obliged, having been a beneficiary of international criminal justice, to surrender Bosco, especially because it was his request. And therefore the process took place, and he was surrendered to the ICC, and now he's facing trial.
ICJ Kenya remained active in restricting the movement of Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir, against whom the International Criminal Court (ICC) issued 2 warrants of arrest for crimes that he allegedly committed in relation to the conflict in Darfur that began in 2003. In 2011, ICJ Kenya obtained a provisional warrant of arrest from the High Court of Kenya against President Bashir to be effected upon his visit to Kenya. ICJ Kenya also advocated for the adherence of the Kenyan government's obligation to cooperate and complement the International Criminal Court (ICC) when President Bashir was invited to attend the inauguration ceremony of the 4th President of Kenya in March 2003. As a result of this intervention, the Sudanese president did not attend the ceremony. As part of its effort towards capacity building on international criminal justice, ICJ Kenya has established a strategic relationship with the East African Magistrate and Judges Association.
As Kenyans, we are proud to have introduced them to the East African Magistrates and Judges Association. In the process, they now work closely with the Uganda Judicial Officers Association. They work together closely with JMAT, Judges and Magistrates Association of Tanzania. They also work with the Rwandan Association of Judicial Officers.
ICJ Kenya has also been instrumental in monitoring the cases of 7 Kenyans illegally rendered to Uganda on terrorism charges for offences in Uganda. The organization has also facilitated training for judicial officers on modes of prosecuting terrorism-related offences, and has continued to advocate for the protection of the human rights and observance of the rule of law in anti-terrorism operations in Kenya.
And when the history of legal aid in Kenya is written, surely a chapter will be reserved for ICJ Kenya.
I think what the people of this country need, all of them, is justice, security, and a sense that they've got dignity and that the authorities recognize that.
Are we going to be relevant in the coming years? Yes. Why? Because we are an organization that speaks for the people of this country.